My name is Ashley Ulrey. I'm 36 years old, and for 14 years I've worked as a senior HVAC technician. Long hours, brutal summers, honest pay, and the kind of physical exhaustion that sinks into your bones. I used to think that kind of work made me strong enough to handle anything. I was wrong about one thing. I didn't expect betrayal to come dressed as confidence waiting for me at my own kitchen table. Last Thursday evening, I came home after a 12-hour shift during one of those summer heat waves where every air conditioner in the city seems to die at once. My shirt was soaked through my hands, smelled like metal and coolant, and all I wanted was a shower and cold leftovers. Instead, I walked into silence, and my husband sitting at the kitchen table with a look I'd learned to dread over the past year. It was the look that said he knew something I didn't. The look that said he thought he was in control. "Sit down," he said calmly. "We need to talk." I didn't sit. Something deep in my gut told me not to. He slid a manila envelope across the table, slow and deliberate, like he was savoring the moment. "Just a peek at what divorce looks like after 3 years," he said. "Thought you should see what you're working with before you waste any more of my time." I opened it. Divorce petition. Fancy law firm letterhead, the kind that advertises during daytime TV. He was asking for the house I bought before we ever met, half my retirement spousal support and compensation for supporting my career. Supporting my career. I nearly laughed. Instead, I closed the folder and said evenly, "Interesting reading material." Then I walked to the hall closet, reached behind the winter coats, and pulled out my own manila envelope, the one I'd been carrying around for 2 weeks, waiting for the exact right moment. I placed it beside his. "Funny thing about that," I said. "I filed mine on the 3rd. You're about 14 days late." The smugness melted off his face like ice on hot pavement. He ripped it open, hands shaking as he saw the court stamp the filing date, the case number already in the system. "You what? You can't just—" "I can," I said, and I did. I watched realization settle in slow and horrifying. He thought he was springing a trap. He never realized I'd already stepped out of it. "You checked out of this marriage over a year ago," I continued quietly. "The late nights that didn't add up, the trips that never appeared on our shared calendar. The way you flinched when I touched you. You thought I didn't notice." His mouth opened, then closed. I pointed to a page in my filing. That section. "That's the forensic accountant's preliminary findings on the $34,000 you moved into a personal account you never told me about." His face went white. "And the house," I added. "It's in a trust. Has been since before we married. My lawyer says you're entitled to exactly nothing." That was when he started crying, not sad tears, angry ones. The kind that come when a perfect plan collapses. I grabbed my keys. "I'll be staying with a friend tonight. Our lawyers will handle everything else." I dropped his envelope into the trash on my way out. "These are worthless now," I said. "First to file sets jurisdiction. That was me." I left him there, staring at the wreckage of his own ambition. And that was only the beginning. If I'm honest, the marriage didn't fall apart in one dramatic moment at the kitchen table. That confrontation was just the curtain being pulled back. The real ending had started almost a year earlier, quietly, in ways that would have been easy to dismiss if I hadn't learned to trust my instincts the way my job taught me to trust pressure gauges and warning signs. Systems don't fail all at once. They fail in patterns. It began with him being nice. That sounds ridiculous, I know. People hear that and think I'm exaggerating or rewriting history to make myself look smarter than I was. But when you've spent months being treated like background noise, spoken over, brushed off, tolerated instead of loved, sudden warmth doesn't feel comforting. It feels rehearsed. He started asking how my day was again. Started cooking dinner on random nights. Started touching my arm when we talked, smiling like the man I married had finally come back. Except something about it felt strategic. Then came the questions. Not emotional questions. Not, "Are you happy, or do you still want this?" The questions were specific, calculated. He asked about my retirement account, how long it had been open, whether it was premarital or not. He asked where the paperwork for the house trust was kept. He asked whether my pension vested annually or quarterly, whether survivor benefits applied automatically. Questions he had never shown the slightest interest in before. At first I answered casually. We were married after all. Transparency was normal. But the more he asked, the more I noticed a pattern. Every question had a number attached to it. A percentage, a timeline. Around the same time, I noticed small inconsistencies in our finances. Nothing dramatic. Grocery bills a little higher than usual. Personal expenses entries I didn't remember making. Transfers that were just small enough to avoid triggering alarms in my head. 1,500 here, 2,000 there. If you work 60 hours a week and come home exhausted, it's easy to assume you forgot. But I hadn't forgotten. The moment everything clicked came from someone else. A friend of mine, someone I'd known since trade school works in insurance. We ran into each other by chance at a gas station, and after the usual small talk, he hesitated before saying, "Hey, I thought you knew." Knew what I asked. That your husband was asking about beneficiary changes after divorce. Personal policy stuff. He came in for a consultation. The way my stomach dropped felt physical, like missing a step on the stairs. That night, I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't accuse. I opened a separate notebook and started writing everything down. Dates, questions he asked, transfers I didn't recognize, every late night, every unexplained trip. I paid a lawyer in cash so nothing would show up on our shared statements. My lawyer suggested a forensic accountant, and within days, the vague discomfort I'd been carrying turned into documented reality. The transfers weren't random. They were systematic, monthly, labeled as personal expenses, then quietly rerouted to a private account he'd opened without telling me. Over 18 months, he'd siphoned more than $34,000 out of our shared finances. He wasn't just planning to leave. He was planning to leave me empty-handed. That was when I filed. Not in anger, not in panic. I filed because once you realize someone sees you as a resource instead of a partner, you stop trying to save the relationship and start protecting yourself. I waited. I let him think he was ahead of me. I let him rehearse his moment. And when he finally slid those papers across the table, convinced he was about to win, I watched his confidence collapse under the weight of his own preparation. The worst part wasn't the money. It was realizing that every smile for the past year had been an investment strategy. The morning after the kitchen showdown, my phone started ringing before I'd even finished my coffee. I was staying on a friend's couch, staring at a ceiling I didn't recognize, trying to wrap my head around how quickly my life had detonated. The name on the screen told me exactly who it was before I answered. His mother. She had always been involved. Too involved. The kind of woman who believed her son was permanently misunderstood by the world and that any woman who didn't accommodate him perfectly was automatically suspect. I took a breath and answered anyway. "What did you do to my son?" she screamed. No greeting, no hesitation. "He called me crying all night. You're trying to destroy him." I let her finish. Years of experience dealing with overheated clients had taught me that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is wait for the noise to burn itself out. "Ma'am," I said calmly. When she finally paused, "Your son has been moving money out of our shared accounts for 18 months and tried to serve me divorce papers demanding half of everything I own. I filed first. That's all." "That's his money too," she snapped. He's entitled to whatever the court decides I cut in. And given the hidden account and the dissipation of marital assets, that won't be much. Have a nice day." I hung up. She called back 6 times. I let every call go to voicemail. By Monday, he had hired a new attorney. Apparently, the daytime television firm he'd started with took one look at my filing and decided it wasn't worth the risk. The new lawyer was sharper, more aggressive, the kind who sends letters designed to intimidate rather than inform. The first demand arrived that afternoon. I was to vacate the house immediately because my presence was causing my husband emotional distress. My lawyer's response was short and devastating. The house was held in a trust established before the marriage. My husband had no legal claim to it. If anyone should vacate, it was the person who initiated divorce proceedings while being accused of financial misconduct. Tuesday afternoon, I stopped by the house to pick up some work equipment I'd left behind. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had told me he was staying with his sister. He lied. When I walked in, I found him sitting on the couch with his mother, his sister, and a man in a suit I didn't recognize. My presence froze the room. "Perfect timing," my husband said, his voice suddenly sugary. "This is my new attorney. We were just discussing how to proceed." "I'm not discussing anything without my lawyer present," I said flatly. "You know that." "We just want to talk reasonably," his attorney said, standing. "Then schedule a meeting through proper channels," I replied. "You're all in my house without permission. That's trespassing." His mother stood up, face flushed. "Trespassing in your husband's home, you've lost your mind." "It's not his home," I said evenly. "It's mine, in a trust. We've been over this." His sister, who had been silent until then, jumped in. "You can't just throw him out on the street. He has rights." "He has the right to find his own accommodations," I said, "like the apartment he's been secretly funding with money siphoned from our accounts. East Side, 3rd floor." The silence that followed was absolute, My husband's face collapsed. How do you know about? I know about everything I said. The account, the apartment, the consultations with 3 different divorce attorneys over the last 6 months, and the story you've been telling your family about me being emotionally abusive. His attorney looked at him with a new expression, professional concern mixed with personal regret. I'd suggest everyone leave my property, I said quietly. The next conversation happens through lawyers or in court. They left. That night I changed every lock on the house. $400 paid without hesitation, worth every cent. Because boundaries only matter if you enforce them. 10 days later, things escalated because of course they did. People like my ex-husband don't back down quietly when their carefully constructed plans fall apart. They look for other ways to regain control, other angles of attack. And when they can't win the legal argument, they try to poison everything around it. The first sign came from my job. I was halfway through a routine maintenance check when my supervisor called and asked me to come into HR immediately. No explanation. Just that flat, careful tone people use when they're trying not to panic you. I wiped my hands, drove back to the office, and walked into a room with 2 HR reps and a printed complaint sitting between them. Someone had made an anonymous report accusing me of using company resources to stalk my estranged husband. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I spent 2 hours calmly explaining the situation, providing my lawyer's contact information, and showing documentation proving that every step I'd taken had been legal above board and initiated through counsel. They reviewed everything. They cleared me completely. But the damage was already done. The point hadn't been to win. It had been to rattle me, to remind me that he could still reach into my life and create chaos if he wanted to. It didn't take long to find out who was behind it. My lawyer traced the call back through a shared vendor contact. Turns out my ex-husband's brother-in-law, his sister's husband, had expressed concern to someone our companies both worked with, who then escalated it. My lawyer sent a cease and desist letter that afternoon. His employer was less amused by the misuse of professional relationships for personal vendettas, and suddenly he was very quiet. Then came the real move. I was served with an emergency motion for exclusive use of the marital residence. His attorney argued that I was creating a hostile environment, that my surveillance of finances and insistence on boundaries made the house unsafe for my husband's mental health. The hearing was scheduled for Friday. In court, his attorney painted me as cold, controlling, obsessive. He presented text messages where I'd asked about purchases as evidence of financial monitoring. Emails where I questioned late nights as emotional isolation, normal marriage communication reframed as manipulation. Then my lawyer stood. She laid out the bank statements showing the systematic transfers, the lease agreement for the apartment my husband had rented 4 months earlier, records of consultations with 3 divorce attorneys while he was still sleeping in my bed, the forensic accountant's report detailing over $34,000 in dissipated assets, and then came the texts. Messages between my ex-husband and his sister recovered from cloud backups during discovery. Messages where he spelled out his plan in plain language. Just need to hit the 3-year mark. That's when support kicks in properly. Already moving money. She's clueless, too busy working. By the time I'm done, she'll be lucky to keep her truck. The courtroom went silent. The judge read them slowly, his expression unreadable. My husband tried to claim they were taken out of context, that he was just venting. His attorney stared at the table like he wanted to disappear. The judge denied the motion. He also issued a preliminary ruling that the house being held in a premarital trust with no evidence of my husband's financial contribution would likely remain my separate property. He scheduled a full hearing for asset division and noted that the evidence of dissipation would factor heavily into any support calculations. Outside the courthouse, his mother was waiting. "You think you've won?" she hissed as I passed her. "You've destroyed his future, for money." I stopped, looked her straight in the eye. "He did this to himself," I said. "He stole from me and planned to take everything I worked for. I just refused to let him." Behind me, I heard her comforting him as he cried. I didn't turn around. Some chapters are better left unread. By the time mediation was ordered, the energy had shifted completely. The man who once slid divorce papers across the table like a trophy walked into the conference room, looking smaller, thinner, and far less certain. Confidence burns fast when it's fueled by stolen money, and his had nearly run out. The judge had made it clear he was done with theatrics. Mediation wasn't optional. It was court-ordered, and everyone in that room knew it was his last chance to control the outcome in any meaningful way. We sat across from each other at a long table, lawyers on either side, a mediator in the center, with spreadsheets stacked neatly in front of him. My ex-husband didn't look at me. He stared at the tabletop like it might offer an escape hatch. The mediator went through everything methodically. Assets, debts, 3 years of marriage reduced to numbers and footnotes. When the house came up, his attorney tried one last time to argue for compensation based on contributions, decorating, gardening, emotional labor. The mediator wasn't impressed. The trust documentation was clear. The house was never marital property. It stayed with me, fully. Next came retirement. Not half 18% of what accumulated during the marriage. The dissipation calculation cut into his share significantly. The $34,000 he'd siphoned off was treated as an advance on what he might have been entitled to. The math was brutal but fair. Then spousal support. None. The mediator noted almost dryly that my ex-husband had already been funding his own transition for months. He'd planned his post-marital life thoroughly. The court wasn't inclined to subsidize it. His mother, who had insisted on waiting in the lobby, broke down in tears when she heard the outcome. "This isn't fair," she wailed loud enough for everyone to hear. "He deserves half." The mediator paused as he walked past. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "your son systematically extracted funds from his marriage while planning an exit strategy designed to maximize his take. The court's job isn't to reward that behavior. It's to ensure equitable distribution." For the first time I had ever seen, she had nothing to say. When the mediation ended, my ex-husband finally looked at me. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "We could have worked something out." "You did work something out," I replied, "just without me." He followed me into the parking lot. "You humiliated me." "You humiliated yourself," I said. "I just stopped protecting you." I drove away feeling no triumph, just relief. Some wars don't end with celebration. They end with exhaustion and the certainty that you survived something designed to destroy you. 3 weeks later, it was effectively over. The paperwork would take months to finalize signatures, filings, administrative delays, but the decisions that mattered had already been made. The future I had almost lost was mine again, not because I fought harder, but because I paid attention sooner. The house felt different once he was gone. Not lonely exactly, just honest. There was no tension humming under the walls anymore, no sense of being evaluated, measured quietly, priced out. At night, the silence felt too loud at first. Then it started to feel like rest. I heard through mutual friends that he'd moved fully into the apartment he'd rented in secret, the one funded by money he assumed I'd never notice missing. Apparently, he'd been telling people I was financially abusive, that I hid assets, that I blindsided him with lawyers and traps. Some people believed him. Most didn't. Anyone who knew us both knew which one of us worked 60-hour weeks and which one had been planning an exit with spreadsheets. His mother cut off contact completely. She told people I was manipulative, dangerous, cold. My own mother laughed when she heard that. "You," she said, "the woman who cries when dogs die in movies." Then she offered to teach me her bread recipe again, like she always had. A week after mediation, my ex-husband sent one last message from his sister's phone. "You'll regret this. You'll end up alone." I didn't respond. He needed me to be the villain, because the alternative, accepting that he was the architect of his own failure, was something his ego couldn't survive. And maybe I would end up alone for a while, but alone was infinitely better than being someone's long-term investment strategy. I kept most of my retirement. I kept the house. I kept my job. I kept my sanity barely but enough. I lost 3 years of my life and $14,000 in legal fees, protecting what was already mine. That's not a victory. It's damage control. But I wasn't destroyed. That was his plan. And it failed. I've started having friends over again, watching games, talking late into the night without walking on eggshells. I'm thinking about adopting a dog, something that needs a home as much as I need the company. My therapist keeps telling me to stop framing everything as winning or losing and start focusing on healing. She's probably right. The mixer is still in the box. I don't even bake, but I might learn. My mom keeps pestering me about that bread recipe. Small steps, quiet ones. Peace doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it just shows up when the door finally closes behind the wrong person. My name is Annalise Carter, and I'm 32, and the strangest part is how normal I felt right before everything cracked open. Last Tuesday started like one of those rare, soft moments you don't question because you're too grateful to have them. Work had been eating me alive for months, the kind of stretch where days blur together and your body keeps moving even after your mind taps out. So when my husband, Richard Carter, came home around 5 o'clock with that bright, eager energy, I wanted to believe it meant something. He kissed my cheek like he'd missed me. He told me to get dressed. He said, "I'm taking you on a special surprise date tonight." I remember how fast my hope rose stupidly sweetly, like my heart had been starving and someone had finally set down a plate. I put on the dress I'd been saving, the one that made me feel like myself again. Richard disappeared into the bedroom and came out in the blazer I loved on him, the one he wore when he wanted to look like the version of himself he used to be, confident, charming, certain. He looked at me and smiled like he was proud, and for a moment I thought maybe we're coming back. Maybe this is how it starts. In the car, I asked where we were going. Richard kept his eyes on the road and said, "You'll see. It's someone I really want you to finally meet." My stomach did a quiet flip. His parents lived across the country. His sister was overseas. There weren't many important people left in his life I hadn't met. I watched the streetlight slide across his face and tried to place the feeling in my chest. Anticipation with a thin edge of unease, like hearing your name in a room you didn't know you'd entered. We drove about 40 minutes into an upscale neighborhood with gates and security cameras, and lawns so perfect they looked fake. Richard turned into a circular driveway in front of a modern mansion, glass, steel, sharp angles, the kind of house that doesn't just say money, it says power. Before I could even form the question, Richard checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusted his collar, and said, "Just come on. Be yourself, okay? But like, the best version." The best version, I repeated, half laughing because it sounded like a joke. But Richard didn't laugh back. He just looked forward again, jaw tight, and the air in the car changed. That's when the first cold thought slid into place. This isn't for me. The front door opened before we even knocked. A woman stood there, late 30s, maybe fit in a way that looked expensive, wearing casual clothes that probably cost more than my whole outfit. She smiled at Richard like they shared a private history that didn't need words. "You made it," she said warmly. Come in, come in." Richard's face lit up, not politely, genuinely, like a lamp switched on. He stepped forward and hugged her. It wasn't a quick greeting. It was familiar, comfortable, the kind of hug that says, "I still belong here." Then he turned slightly as if remembering I existed and said, "Annalise, this is Veronica Hale." The name hit me like a slap because I knew it. I'd heard it twice in 4 years, always said quickly, always wrapped in vagueness. It didn't work out. We wanted different things, the past sealed and labeled and stored away. Veronica extended her hand to me like a hostess welcoming a guest to her domain. "So you're Annalise," she said. "It's great to finally meet you." My throat tightened. "You're Richard's ex-wife," I heard myself say because my brain needed to say it out loud to believe it. Veronica's smile widened, like she found my discomfort charming. "That's right." Richard squeezed my shoulder as if that should comfort me, as if this was normal, as if the ground hadn't just vanished under my feet. "Come on," he said. "She's just finished renovating some things. I wanted you to see." I wanted to ask 100 questions. I wanted to demand why we were here. But something about the scene. The mansion, Veronica's calm certainty, Richard's eagerness made me feel like if I spoke too loudly, I'd be the only one who sounded crazy. So I walked in. Veronica gave us a tour like she was showing off a museum exhibit. The kitchen gleamed with new appliances. The home theater smelled like fresh leather. The wine cellar held bottles with labels I couldn't pronounce. Richard's reactions were the part that hurt most. He oohed and awed like a kid in a toy store. He asked questions. He remembered details. He sounded like someone who used to live this life. And I followed behind them like an afterthought. In the living room, there were other people. 2 couples, all dressed well, laughing too easily. They greeted Veronica with the ease of longtime friends. When their eyes landed on me, their smiles sharpened slightly, like they were about to be entertained. Veronica clapped her hands softly. "Everyone," she announced, "this is my ex-husband Richard, and his wife." Then Richard laughed, like he was proud of the moment, and before I could even decide how to stand, Veronica tilted her head and said, playful and bright, "So this is the current project." The room erupted in laughter. My face went hot. I forced a smile that felt like stretching cracked skin. Project. I echoed quietly, as if repeating it would turn it into something else. Veronica waved a hand like I was being dramatic. "Oh, you know what I mean. A work in progress. We're all works in progress." But the way she said it, light dismissive, like I was a renovation Richard had taken on, and the way everyone looked at me like I was something being upgraded, fixed, made presentable. It wasn't a joke. It was a label. And the worst part was, Richard didn't correct her. He didn't flinch. He just let it land on me and stay there. Veronica poured drinks, expensive scotch for them, wine for me. She didn't ask what I wanted. She just decided. Then the conversation became a performance, Veronica talking about business travel purchases and Richard leaning in, hanging on every word like he missed the sound of her voice. At one point, Veronica mentioned a restaurant somewhere European, that little place by the water. And Richard smiled, soft private, and said, "How could I forget, could I?" Not to me, to her. I sat there for 2 hours watching my husband become a version of himself I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. I watched him laugh too hard at Veronica's jokes. I watched him look at her like she was the answer to a question he'd never stopped asking. And all the while I sat in the same room trying not to drown in the feeling that everyone there knew exactly where I fit in the story, the placeholder, the safe choice, the project. On the drive home, I didn't speak. My hands were folded in my lap so tightly my fingers ached. Richard finally broke the silence, cheerful like nothing had happened. Wasn't that fun? I've been wanting you two to meet forever. Why? My voice came out flat, which surprised even me. What do you mean, why? Why did you want me to meet your ex-wife? Richard sighed, like I was being unreasonable. Because she's important to me. We're still friends. I don't believe in cutting people out just because a relationship ends. You introduced me as your project, I said, keeping my eyes on the windshield because I couldn't stand the look I knew he'd give me. Oh my God, Richard groaned. Don't be sensitive. It was a joke. It didn't feel like a joke. Well, it was. You're being ridiculous. The words were so familiar, sensitive, ridiculous, that something in me went still, like a door quietly closing. We didn't talk the rest of the drive. That night I lay awake replaying everything, the hug at the door, the sparkle in Richard's eyes. Veronica's calm ownership of him, the way he hadn't once looked at me like I was the person he chose. By morning, my chest felt heavy with a certainty I didn't want. I called in sick. Then I did the thing I swore I'd never do, not because I thought it was noble to avoid it, but because I feared what I'd find. Richard kept his tablet in the nightstand. He never locked it. My hands shook as I opened it like my body already knew. Messages, months of them, daily. Sometimes sweet, sometimes hungry, always intimate in a way that made my stomach turn. Thinking about you. Miss your face. Remember when we... Photos Veronica had sent him. Not explicit. Worse, familiar. Personal. The kind of closeness that doesn't exist in just friends. Then I found the thread about me. Veronica. How's the project coming along, Richard? Getting there. Still rough around the edges, but she's trainable. Trainable. Like I was a dog, like I was a thing. I took screenshots of everything with the calm precision of someone handling evidence at a crime scene. I emailed them to myself. I put the tablet back exactly where I found it, even smoothing the blanket as if that could smooth what I'd just learned. When Richard came home that evening, I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I made dinner. I served it. I sat across from him and watched him eat like a man who believed he was safe. Finally, Richard glanced up. Are you still mad about last night? No, I said, my voice steady enough to frighten me. Richard smiled, relieved. Good, because Veronica is having a small dinner party Friday. I thought we could go together. I set my fork down carefully, the way you do, when you don't want anyone to hear your hands shaking. Actually, I said, meeting his eyes at last, I have plans Friday. Richard frowned. What plans? I breathed in once slow and controlled, and felt the moment tighten like a wire. I'm meeting with a divorce attorney. Richard's fork clattered onto his plate. His face flickered confusion, panic, anger, like a broken signal trying to settle on one emotion. And I just sat there calm in the silence because for the first time since that mansion door opened, I knew exactly who I was in this story. Not a project, not a joke. A person who was done. Richard stared at me like I'd spoken a language he didn't understand. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him, almost. His mouth opened, then closed again, like his brain was scrambling to find the version of reality where this didn't end badly for him. You can't be serious, he finally said, pushing his chair back slightly. This is because of some texts. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't even sigh. I just looked at him the way you look at someone who's already made their choice, whether they admit it or not. I saw everything I said. The messages, the photos, the plans, the way you talk about me. His face hardened instantly, defensive anger rushing in to replace panic. You went through my tablet. You introduced me as your project to the woman you're still emotionally involved with, I replied. If you want to talk about boundaries, let's start there. I am not in love with her, Richard snapped, standing up now. We're friends. That's it. Friends don't discuss future timing, I said quietly. Friends don't ask if someone is trainable. Friends don't compliment their ex's outfit before a date with their spouse. For a brief moment, just a crack, his certainty faltered. Then it sealed back up. You're twisting things, he said. You've always been insecure. There it was. The familiar pivot. The rewriting of reality where his behavior was fine and my reaction was the problem. I felt something settle in my chest then, heavy but solid, like a door locking from the inside. I'm done, I said. I'm filing Monday morning. You can't just throw away our marriage, Richard said. Voice rising now. You're overreacting. Watch me. The next 5 days were like watching someone cycle through grief in fast forward, except it wasn't grief, it was entitlement losing its footing. Thursday, Richard tried logic, calmly explaining how I'd misunderstood everything. Friday, he tried tears, apologizing in vague circles that never quite landed on responsibility. Saturday came anger. How dare I invade his privacy? How dare I humiliate him by threatening divorce? Sunday was bargaining. If it makes you feel better, he said, pacing the living room. I'll stop talking to Veronica. It's not about insecurity, I replied. It's about respect, something you don't have for me. Monday morning, I sat in a small office across from a divorce attorney named Margaret, a woman with kind eyes and a voice steady enough to hold everything I spilled onto her desk. I showed her the screenshots. She didn't gasp. She didn't judge. She just nodded slowly. This is emotional infidelity, she said, possibly planning for physical infidelity. Either way, you documented it well. The word documented felt like oxygen. She asked practical questions. How long were we married? 2 years. Finances. Mostly separate. The condo mine bought 3 years before I even met Richard. Joint assets. One savings account. No kids. This should be relatively clean, Margaret said. Short marriage. Separate finances. Clear evidence. I filed that afternoon. Richard was served at work on Wednesday. The phone calls started immediately. 32 missed calls in one day. Texts that bounced wildly between apology and threat. We need to talk like adults. You're making a huge mistake. My lawyer says you're screwed. I responded once all communication goes through my attorney. Her information is in the service documents. Thursday evening, Veronica called me. Seeing her name on my phone felt surreal, like the story had stepped out of the page and started touching things in my life. I let it ring out. She tried again, and again. On the fourth call, curiosity outweighed caution. Annalise, she said smoothly, like we were old friends. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I laughed once, short and humorless. Is this Richard's ex-wife? Yes, but... Save it, I said. Tell my husband I said hi. I hung up and blocked her number. Friday night, Richard showed up at the condo. I'd changed the locks Wednesday. He pounded on the door like the world still belonged to him. Let me in, he shouted. I live here. I opened the door with the chain still on. You got the service papers. You know this is my property. You can't lock me out, he said. My stuff is in there. I'll pack it, I replied calmly. You can pick it up Sunday at 2. Bring someone to help. This is illegal, he snapped. Check with your lawyer, I said. It's not. He tried to push the door. The chain held. He stepped back, breathing hard, eyes flashing with something that looked dangerously close to fear. I made a mistake, he said finally. Okay, I'm sorry. Can we just talk? There's nothing to talk about, I said. The marriage is over. He shook his head like he couldn't accept it. Over some texts. No, I said. Over who you are. Sunday at 2 o'clock sharp, Richard arrived with Veronica. The audacity of it almost impressed me. They stood in my driveway like a united front, Richard trying to look strong. Veronica composed and watchful, already assessing what belonged to her now. I opened the garage door and revealed the boxes neatly stacked, labeled, organized. This should be everything, I said to Richard, ignoring her completely. Can we talk? Richard asked, glancing toward the house. Inside. Nope. 5 minutes, please. Your lawyer can talk to my lawyer, I said. That's all we need. Veronica cleared her throat. I think you're misunderstanding. Did I ask you anything? I cut in, not raising my voice, just refusing to bend. She looked at Richard. He nodded at her. And she started loading boxes. Watching her carry his things out of my life felt strange and satisfying in a way I didn't fully understand yet. This woman with the mansion and the polished smile playing moving crew for the man who'd chosen her over his marriage. When they finished, Richard tried one last time. Don't you think this is extreme? I met his eyes. When's the last time you looked at me the way you look at her? He didn't answer. That's what I thought I said. Take care of yourself. I closed the garage door and didn't look back. 3 weeks after I filed, I learned something important. Some people don't process consequences as reality. They experience them as an insult. Richard didn't fall apart quietly. He went on the offensive. His lawyer tried everything. Claimed Richard had a marital interest in my condo, despite never being on the deed. Margaret shut that down in one email with purchase records dated 3 years before I even met him. Then they claimed he'd contributed to the mortgage. I provided bank statements showing every payment came from my account. Utilities and groceries. He paid those. That was it. Separate finances. Separate lives, finally on paper. Then his mother called. I'd met her maybe 4 times in 2 years. She never learned my birthday, never asked about my work, but she had no trouble finding my number now. You're destroying my son's life, she said without preamble. Your son destroyed his marriage, I replied. He made a mistake. He's sorry. He's sorry he got caught. You're being vindictive, she snapped. You're taking everything from him. I'm keeping what's mine, I said. He's keeping what's his. That's how divorce works. He needs more, she insisted. He has to find a place to live. That should have occurred to him before emotionally cheating with his ex-wife, I said evenly. That's not what happened. The messages say otherwise, I replied. Have a nice day. I blocked her number. A week later, Margaret called me, laughing, actually laughing. You're not going to believe this, she said. Veronica had sent a letter through her own attorney accusing me of harassment. The letter claimed I was interfering with her relationship with Richard and causing her emotional distress by filing for divorce. Her partner. They weren't even pretending anymore. Margaret's response was brief and devastating. My client's divorce from her husband has nothing to do with your client. Stop wasting everyone's time. But here's where things shifted. Through mutual acquaintances, people who knew people, I learned that Veronica's business relied heavily on government contracts. Reputation mattered. Optics mattered. Dating a married man while his divorce was pending didn't exactly scream sound judgment. I didn't leak anything. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't have to. 2 days later, Richard called me from a number I didn't recognize. I answered already knowing something had gone wrong. You told her business partner about us, he accused. I didn't tell anyone anything I said truthfully. Well, someone did, he snapped. Now she's getting pressure at work. Not my problem. You're trying to ruin her life because you can't have me. I actually laughed. Can't have you. I'm divorcing you. You're the one who couldn't let her go. Silence stretched. We're in love, he finally said. We always have been. There it was, the truth unvarnished. Then why did you marry me, I asked. Silence again. Why waste 2 years of my life pretending you wanted to be my husband when you were just killing time until she wanted you back? It wasn't like that, he said weakly. Then explain it, I said. Explain it to me. He couldn't. Sign the papers, I said. Move on, be with her. I don't care anymore. You do care, he shot back. That's why you're being so mean. I'm being honest, I replied. There's a difference. I hung up and blocked the number. The temporary orders hearing was almost anticlimactic. The judge reviewed the messages, the timeline, the evidence. When Richard tried the "we're just friends" line, the judge raised an eyebrow. Friends who discuss future plans and timing, she asked. That context doesn't help you. Temporary orders granted everything I requested. Exclusive use of the condo, joint savings split evenly, no spousal support. Richard's attorney tried to argue emergency need. Does he have employment, the judge asked. Yes. Then he can use his income for housing, she said. Motion denied. Outside the courthouse, Richard cried. His mother glared. Veronica stood off to the side, waiting. He went straight to her. She put an arm around him. I walked to my car alone and felt lighter than I had in months. The divorce finalized 2 months later, 90 days from filing to decree. Clean, fast, final. I kept the condo. We split the savings. Each kept our own retirement accounts and vehicles. No spousal support, no alimony, no theatrics left to perform. Then, karma, apparently bored, decided to entertain itself. Veronica's company lost a major contract renewal, not officially because of her relationship, but during the review questions came up about leadership judgment and personal conduct. Her business partner forced her out at a significant loss. Richard moved into her mansion. 2 weeks later, he moved out. Turns out stress changes people. Without the money, without the lifestyle, Veronica wasn't the woman Richard remembered. And Richard, without someone to manage him, wasn't the trainable success story she wanted. She moved back in with her mother. As for me, the condo grew quiet in the best way. I repainted the bedroom, bought new furniture, started therapy, work stabilized. I got a small promotion, more responsibility, better pay. My boss told me I seemed more focused lately. He was right. I ran into Richard once by accident at a coffee shop. He looked older, tired. "I'm sorry," he said. "I really did love you, just not the way you deserved." "I know," I replied. "That's the problem." I finished my coffee and went home. The thing about being someone's project is that projects have end dates. They get completed, abandoned, or demolished. Richard tried to rebuild me into something that would make his ex-wife happy, something that would prove he'd moved on. But I was never a project. I was a person. And the best revenge wasn't elaborate or cruel. I didn't destroy careers or smear reputations. I just left with my dignity, my home, and my self-respect intact. Karma handled the rest. My name is Trish Valdez, and I am 32 years old. I have always believed that order is a form of mercy you grant yourself before the world decides to be cruel. I check expiration dates on milk cartons 3 times before buying. I keep a spreadsheet for my skincare routine color-coded by morning and night. My Outlook calendar looks like a stained glass window of carefully blocked time. Chaos has never been something I ride out. Chaos is something I preemptively suffocate. That's how I built my career, how I built my marriage, how I built a life that until one Tuesday evening looked so stable from the outside that people assumed it had always been that way. Mark Valdez, my husband of 5 years, was the only variable I ever allowed myself to believe I could manage without micromanaging. He was 34, charming, in a slightly rumpled way, good at sales because he sold confidence more than product, and just disorganized enough that people mistook it for authenticity. We had been together 7 years total. We owned a colonial house in a suburb designed to signal success without arrogance. Sensible luxury cars, a joint savings account we referred to as the nursery fund, even though we hadn't yet decided when we would actually use it. Stability curated and displayed like a showroom. It was Taco Tuesday. Specifically Taco Tuesday because Mark loved routines as long as he didn't have to be the one planning them. He was in the shower music playing faintly through the bathroom door. I was in the kitchen scraping leftover ground beef into a Tupperware container, the smell of cumin and lime still hanging in the air. His phone sat on the granite island, plugged into the charger screen face up. It buzzed. I don't usually look at his phone. I'm not the snooping type, not because I'm morally superior, but because I believe that once you feel the need to snoop, the relationship is already hemorrhaging. But the screen lit up right next to the salsa bowl, and I saw the preview without trying. Ashley client, do not delete. Can't stop thinking about last night. My body went still in a way that wasn't panic. It was more like my brain refused to accept the image at first, as if blinking might rewrite it. Client. Why was a client using the double heart emoji? Why was a client thinking about last night? Mark had told me he was at a networking dinner with guys from the regional office. I set the spatula down carefully, wiped my hands on a paper towel, and walked to the phone. Mark has never been smart about security. His passcode is the last 4 digits of his social security number. I typed it in. The thread opened. Ashley, you were amazing. Ashley, I miss your hands already. Ashley, when can you get away from her? Her, capital H, me reduced to a pronoun in someone else's fantasy. I scrolled up. 3 months of messages, photos, selfies in his car, my car, the Audi. I let him use when his was in the shop. Explicit descriptions of hotel rooms I recognized from our credit card statements, all filed neatly under business expenses. Napa weekends. Tuesday sushi dinners that suddenly made sense. The adrenaline hit, then sharp and clarifying, like stepping into an ice bath. I didn't feel hysterical. I felt focused. There were a dozen ways I could have reacted. I could have marched into the bathroom and screamed. I could have thrown the phone into the toilet. I could have packed a bag and left. But all of those options were messy, emotional, and emotions cost you leverage in a divorce. The phone buzzed again. A typing bubble appeared. Ashley, hello, Marky. I almost laughed, almost gagged. I took a slow breath and typed back my thumb steady. Me as Mark, me too. The reply came instantly. Ashley, I feel guilty though. Me as Mark don't. You know she doesn't appreciate me like you do. Ashley didn't hesitate. Exactly. We talked about this. I stared at the screen, then typed the sentence that changed everything. Me as Mark, you're right. I think it's time. A pause. Then time for what? Me as Mark to come clean. I can't live a lie anymore. Let's tell my wife together. The typing bubble vanished, reappeared, vanished again. Ashley. What? No. Mark, you said we were waiting, Ashley. You can't just tell her, Ashley. She'll ruin everything, Ashley. You said she's unstable. Unstable. That was new. Creative, even. I watched the messages pile up as panic took over. Ashley, Mark, stop. Ashley. Please don't do this. Ashley. Pick up the phone. The phone started ringing. Ashley, client, do not delete. I didn't answer. I let it ring while I went into his settings, turned off Face ID, and changed the passcode to our anniversary date, something he had already forgotten once and would never guess now. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to my email. Then I deleted the sent messages from the thread so it looked untouched on his end and archived the chat. The shower turned off. The glass door slid open. Babe, Mark called. Did you see my towel? The phone buzzed again. Ashley was calling back. This time I answered and put it on speaker. I didn't say a word. I walked toward the bathroom. Mark Ashley's voice came through high-pitched and frantic. Why are you texting me like that? You can't tell her. You said we'd wait until after bonus season so she couldn't take your money. Mark, answer me. Mark stepped out of the bathroom, water dripping from his hair, a towel wrapped around his waist. He froze when he saw the phone in my hand. Mark Ashley shrieked. Are you there? Please tell me you didn't tell the psycho. His face drained of color so fast it was almost impressive. I smiled, not warmly, not cruelly, just precisely. Hi, Ashley, I said, my voice calm, professional, the tone I use in board meetings. Mark is a little tied up right now. He's wearing a towel, but he's right here. Did you want to repeat the part about bonus season? Silence. Thick, heavy silence. Then the line went dead. Mark stared at me like I was a stranger who had wandered into his house. I can explain. I'm sure you can, I said. But first, you're going to pack a bag. You have 10 minutes before I lock the doors. He didn't move. 9, I added. And Mark, if you try to take the PlayStation, I will call your mother. That did it. He scrambled. I walked downstairs, poured myself a glass of the Cabernet we were saving for our 5th anniversary, and sat on the couch. I transferred exactly half of our joint savings into my personal account, down to the penny. I removed him as an authorized user on my credit card. I changed the password to our joint email. 7 minutes later, he came down with a duffel bag and terror written across his face. Please, he started. She's just a client. It meant nothing. She seems to think it meant bonus season, I said, holding out my hand. The key. He hesitated. Where am I supposed to go? Ashley sounded eager, I replied. Maybe she has a couch. He dropped the key into my palm. I locked the door behind him, set the alarm, and only then, only when everything was secured, did I let myself cry. I cried for exactly 14 minutes. Then I washed my face, applied my night cream, and went to sleep in the middle of the bed. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, not because I was anxious, but because my body is trained to respond to unfinished systems. Mark's side of the bed was empty, the sheets untouched, the indentation already fading. I lay there for a moment, listening to the house settle to the unfamiliar quiet that felt less like loss and more like reclaimed territory. Then I got up, made coffee, and opened my laptop. People like to imagine that moments like this are followed by sobbing fits and dramatic phone calls. They aren't, at least not for me. They're followed by lists. I opened a new document and titled it, Next Steps, no punctuation, no emotion, just execution. By 8:07 a.m., I had called a divorce attorney. His name was Victor Vance, though he insisted everyone call him Mr. Vance. He charged $450 an hour and spoke in a gravelly monotone that suggested he had long ago run out of patience for theatrics. When I explained what had happened, he didn't interrupt. He listened, asked for dates, timelines, and whether I had documentation. When I told him I had screenshots, bank statements, and a preliminary ledger of shared assets, he paused for half a second. Good, he said. That saves us time. At work, I was efficient to the point of unnerving my team. I resolved a supply chain delay, approved 3 vendor contracts, and rescheduled a quarterly review, all while my phone sat face down on my desk. I didn't need to look at it to know Mark would start texting soon. Men like him don't disappear quietly. They orbit looking for gravity. The first text came at 10:42 a.m. Mark, I need my suits. I have a meeting. I replied without hesitation. Me. They're in a garbage bag on the porch. It's raining. There was a pause then. Mark, you can't lock me out of my own house. This is illegal. Me, you left voluntarily. I have ring footage. Please direct further communication to my attorney. That was when the entitlement surfaced fully like an infection breaking through skin. Mark. You're being petty. Mark. I'm willing to forgive you for the phone stunt if we can talk like adults. I read that one twice just to be sure I hadn't misinterpreted it. He was willing to forgive me for catching him. The audacity was almost impressive. I didn't respond. By noon, Mr. Vance had reviewed my materials and called me back. We're in a no-fault state, he said. The infidelity matters emotionally, but not legally, unless we can prove dissipation of marital assets. I know, I said. I'm working on that. Good, he replied. Because based on what you've sent, I suspect you'll find more. He was right. That evening after dinner, leftover risotto I barely tasted. I became something between a forensic accountant and an archaeologist. I pulled credit card statements, Venmo histories, Uber receipts, hotel confirmations. Patterns emerged. Tuesday sushi dates that lined up perfectly with his supposed late meetings. Napa weekends billed as conferences. Gifts categorized as client entertainment. I cross-referenced everything. By midnight, I had a number. In the last 6 months alone, Mark had spent roughly $14,500 of our joint money on Ashley. That didn't include what he'd hidden better, the things he hadn't been sloppy about. That was just what he'd been arrogant enough to assume I'd never check. The text continued. Mark. My mom says you're overreacting. Mark. We should go to counseling. Mark. You're throwing away 7 years. I muted the thread and went to bed. The next escalation came 2 days later while I was at work. The receptionist buzzed my office. There's a young woman here to see you, she said. She says it's personal. I pulled up the lobby camera feed. It was Ashley. She looked younger in person, maybe 24, wearing a beige trench coat that was too expensive to be accidental. She clutched a Starbucks cup like it was an anchor. I considered having security escort her out. Instead, curiosity won. Send her to conference room B, I said. When I walked in, she didn't stand. She looked up at me with wide, watery eyes, already arranged for sympathy. Mrs. Valdez, she began. Trish, I corrected. What do you want, Ashley? She took a breath. You need to stop bullying Mark. I almost smiled. Almost. He's staying at a Motel 6, she continued. It's disgusting. He has allergies. He's allergic to accountability, I said, not motels. Her composure cracked for a second, then reassembled into something practiced. We're in love, she said. He told me how cold you are, how you track his spending control, his schedule. You treated him like an employee. I leaned back in the chair. And yet I said lightly, he let me pay for your hotel rooms. Her hand went to her wrist instinctively. The bracelet glinted under the fluorescent lights. That's Cartier, I said. Love style. He bought that with a Visa ending in 4589. That's a joint card, which means I technically own 50% of that bracelet. Her face drained of color. You're crazy, she said. No, I replied. I'm solvent. There's a difference. She swallowed. My dad can't know. There it was. The truth, finally. Your dad, I repeated. Mark's biggest client. She nodded, eyes shining. He'd pull the contract. Mark would lose his job. And you'd lose your lifestyle, I said quietly. She flinched. I haven't called him, I continued. But Mr. Vance is filing the divorce petition on Monday. Since Mark spent marital assets on you, you'll be named in the proceedings. We'll need to depose you. A deposition, she whispered. Yes, I said. Under oath. Public record. Your father has Google alerts, doesn't he? She stood abruptly, chair scraping. You can't. I can, I said. Unless you return every item he bought you with my money. By Friday. 5 p.m. I hate you, she hissed. Get in line, I replied, checking my watch. You have 48 hours. She left shaking. That night my phone rang. Linda Valdez. What have you done to my son? She demanded. I closed my eyes. Good evening, Linda. She launched into a tirade about forgiveness, about men having needs, about how if I were more attentive, none of this would have happened. She reminded me helpfully that my own father had cheated and my mother had stayed. I am not my mother, I said and hung up. An alert pinged on my phone moments later. Attempted charge $4,500. Luxury escapes Cabo. Declined. I forwarded the screenshot to Mr. Vance. Subject line, more evidence. I slept better than I had in weeks. Friday arrived with the kind of calm that only comes before something either resolves or explodes. I took a half day off work, not because I needed the time, but because I wanted control over the clock. I arrived at Mr. Vance's office at 4:30, 15 minutes earlier than necessary, and sat in the waiting room with a paper cup of coffee that tasted faintly like regret and burnt plastic. The magazines on the table were from 2019. I flipped through one anyway, not reading, just occupying my hands. At 4:55, the glass door opened. Ashley walked in without the trench coat. She was wearing gray sweatpants, an oversized hoodie, and sunglasses that were far too large for her face. She looked smaller somehow, like someone who had misjudged a gamble and was now recalculating their odds in real time. She didn't look at me. She walked straight to the receptionist's desk and dropped a shopping bag from Target onto the counter with a thud that echoed louder than necessary. "Here," she said. Her voice was flat, defeated. "Greta." Mr. Vance's paralegal, a woman with the posture of a retired drill sergeant and the soul of a saint, opened the bag without comment. One by one the items emerged. The red Cartier box, the bracelet inside coiled and gleaming, the Dyson Airwrap still wrapped carefully, as if Ashley had hoped presentation might earn her mercy, a Balenciaga clutch I hadn't even known existed. "Good catch," Greta muttered, making a note. "We'll inventory this against the records." Ashley finally turned toward me. She pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were swollen-rimmed red mascara smudged beneath them. "He broke up with me," she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "When?" "Yesterday," she replied. "After I told him I had to give the stuff back. He said I was ungrateful, that I let you win. He called me a liability." There it was, the final demotion, from fantasy to inconvenience. "I thought he loved me." She whispered the words, sounding foreign even to her own ears. "He loved how you made him feel," I said, not unkindly. "There's a difference." She swallowed. "You're not going to call my dad." "I promised I wouldn't call him," I said. "And I won't." She nodded, relief flickering across her face like a match struck briefly in the dark. Then she turned and left without another word. I felt a twinge of something that might have been pity. It lasted less than a second. 24 is young, but it's old enough to know that sleeping with a married man comes with consequences. I took the bag of luxury goods home with me. They sat in my living room like artifacts from a life Mark had been running parallel to ours. I cataloged them, photographed them, and locked them away. They would be sold and folded neatly into the legal fund. Everything has a place if you're disciplined enough. Saturday morning, I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. Not a polite ring, an aggressive, sustained assault on the chime. I checked the ring camera. Mark, Linda, and a locksmith. I didn't open the door. I spoke through the intercom. "Mark, you are trespassing. Leave." "It's my house, too," he shouted, his voice already frayed. "My name is on the deed. I have a locksmith." I looked at the locksmith on the screen. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight like a man who had been misled. "Sir," I said calmly, addressing him directly. "My name is Trish Valdez. I am the sole occupant of this property at the moment. If you drill that lock, I will call the police and report a break-in." The locksmith glanced at Mark. "You said you lost your keys," he said. "You didn't say she was inside." "Just do it," Linda shrieked. She was wearing a fur coat. In May. "I'm not getting involved in this," the locksmith said, already packing up his tools. Mark grabbed his arm. "I'll pay you double." "Don't touch me," the locksmith snapped, pulling away and heading for his van. That was when Mark lost what little restraint he had left. He picked up a decorative rock from the garden, the one I painted last summer, absurdly cheerful, and hurled it at the living room window. Glass shattered. The alarm screamed to life, piercing and relentless. "Open the door," Mark yelled. I didn't. I dialed 911. "My estranged husband is attempting to break into my home," I said evenly. "He just smashed a window. I am alone and afraid for my safety." The police arrived in 4 minutes. In that time, Mark managed to clear the broken glass and wedge himself halfway through the window, one leg inside, one leg out. Linda cheered him on from the lawn like it was a sporting event. 2 officers approached, hands on their holsters. "Sir, step away from the window." "It's my house," Mark screamed. "Sir, step away now." He tried to scramble fully inside. One officer grabbed his ankle and yanked. Mark fell backward into the mulch with a sound that was almost anticlimactic. They cuffed him. Linda went berserk. She swung her tiny sequined purse at one of the officers. "Don't touch him." "Ma'am, step back," the officer warned. "Arrest me then," she shrieked. "This is communism." So they did. I watched from behind the broken window as my husband and my mother-in-law were placed into separate squad cars. Mark looked up at me, eyes wild. "You planned this," he screamed. "You manipulated me." I sipped my coffee. "I documented you," I corrected quietly, though he couldn't hear me. When it was over, I called Mr. Vance. "Mark was arrested for attempted breaking and entering," I said. "His mother assaulted a police officer." There was a pause. Then, to my surprise, he chuckled. "Well, he said that simplifies Monday." I boarded up the window that afternoon, swept up the glass, and showered. As the sun set, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Hey, this is Ashley's dad." My stomach dropped just for a moment. She told me everything. The message continued. "I'm sorry for her behavior. She's been cut off and sent to live with her aunt in Ohio. As for Mark, we're reviewing our accounts. There appear to be discrepancies." Discrepancies. That word would change everything. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. Somewhere, a system had finally stopped compensating for Mark's incompetence. By Sunday morning, the word discrepancies had settled into my thoughts like a loose thread you can't stop tugging. I hadn't contacted Ashley's father. I hadn't even considered it, which meant this wasn't retaliation, it was exposure. Mark hadn't just been reckless with my trust. He had been careless with someone far more dangerous, the man who signed his commission checks. I replied once briefly, carefully. "I appreciate you letting me know. I'm sorry it came to this." The response came almost immediately. "Don't be. You saved me a lot of money in the long run. We'll be handling Mark." I stared at the screen longer than necessary, then locked my phone and set it face down on the table. There was nothing more to say. When people like Mark finally meet someone who doesn't need them, the fallout is swift and unsentimental. Mark spent that night in county holding. Linda made bail. Mark did not. I refused to pay it, and according to Mr. Vance, Mark had already maxed out his remaining credit cards, trying to book a vacation and fund his disappearing act. The entitlement had finally run headfirst into a concrete wall, literally. Monday morning arrived with the efficiency of fate. Mr. Vance filed the divorce petition and the motion for exclusive use of the marital home. The police report from the weekend was already attached. Attempted breaking and entering, resisting arrest, property damage. A neat stack of evidence that spoke louder than any emotional testimony ever could. That restraining order hearing Mr. Vance said over the phone, "It's not even a question. He won't be allowed within 500 feet of you or the house." I thanked him and hung up. I felt lighter, not happy, not relieved, just unburdened, like I had finally put down something heavy I'd been carrying for years without realizing it. 2 days later, the call came. Mark had been fired. Not laid off, not let go. Fired. Ashley's father hadn't just reviewed the accounts. He had audited them. Mark had been submitting expense reports to the company for client dinners and trips, then paying for those same expenses with our joint funds and pocketing the reimbursements. Double dipping. Over 2 years, it added up to nearly $20,000. Embezzlement. When Mr. Vance told me, he didn't sound surprised. "This explains his confidence," he said. "Men who cheat in one area usually cheat everywhere." Criminal charges followed quickly. Mark was offered a plea deal to avoid prison time, probation restitution, and a felony charge that would sit on his record like a permanent stain. His priorities shifted overnight. He no longer cared about winning the divorce. He needed money for a criminal defense attorney. Leverage evaporated. The divorce itself was almost anticlimactic. Because Mark was facing fraud charges, his negotiating power was non-existent. We documented the dissipated marital assets, deducted the money he'd spent on Ashley, the cost of the broken window and legal fees. I kept the house. I had to buy out his share of the equity, but after everything was calculated, it amounted to pennies compared to what he'd taken from me. I refinanced in my own name. I kept 100% of my retirement account. He liquidated most of his to pay restitution and attorney fees. Alimony was never even discussed. Technically, he owed me money. I framed the judgment and hung it in my home office. It felt appropriate. 6 months later, the house is quiet in a way that feels intentional, not lonely. The silence isn't heavy anymore. It's curated, luxurious. Mark pled guilty to a lesser charge and is currently on probation. He lives in a basement apartment with a roommate he found online and works at a car rental agency near the airport. He texted me once from a new number. "I miss the dogs. I have a cat. He never noticed." Linda sends handwritten letters about sin and judgment. I return them unopened. Ashley is in Ohio, according to social media. I looked once. She works at a bakery now and posts Bible verses under photos of sourdough. Her influencer dreams appear to be on hold. I sold the luxury items she returned and used the money to fund a solo trip to Italy. I ate pasta, drank wine, and didn't check the expiration date on a single thing. Somewhere between Florence and Rome, I realized something important. Control is an illusion. You can color code your life, track every penny, manage every system, but you can't control people. Mark felt entitled to a life he didn't earn. Ashley felt entitled to a man who belonged to someone else. Linda felt entitled to dictate my future. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped propping them up. Last night, my phone buzzed. A text from a man I met in Italy. His name is Luca. He's an architect. Thinking about dinner last night, he wrote, "The pasta was almost as good as the company." I smiled and typed back, "I agree. Next time I'm cooking." The sun is setting now. My spreadsheets are closed. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork, a locked door, and letting people face the consequences of their own choices. And it tastes like vintage Cabernet.